The most dangerous mistake a man can make is believing the woman he broke will never rise again. The giant clock above Grand Central Terminal glowed gold against the Manhattan night as thousands of travelers rushed beneath it, dragging suitcases across marble floors polished so brightly they reflected the crystal lights hanging from the vaulted ceiling above. Outside, black SUVs lined the curb while photographers crowded behind velvet ropes waiting for New York's elite to arrive at the Whitmore Foundation Winter Charity Auction, the kind of event where billionaires donated six figures over champagne and string quartets played softly beneath painted ceilings older than most American cities. But inside the upper-level ballroom overlooking the terminal, Alina Brooks stood perfectly still while a security guard blocked her path with polite embarrassment written all over his face. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said carefully, glancing down at the tablet in his hands. "Your name isn't on the VIP access list." Around them, conversations slowed. Wealthy guests in black tuxedos and designer gowns turned discreetly toward the scene unfolding near the entrance, curiosity spreading through the ballroom faster than the soft jazz drifting from the live band near the marble staircase. Alina felt the familiar heat of humiliation creep into her chest, but her expression never cracked. She had spent too many years mastering silence. Her fitted black dress was elegant but understated, the kind of dress a woman wore when she wanted dignity instead of attention. Diamond earrings caught the chandelier light as she straightened her shoulders calmly. "There must be a mistake," she replied softly. "I was invited." The security guard looked uncomfortable. "I understand, ma'am, but without confirmation, I can't let you inside." Then came the voice she had prayed never to hear again. "Actually," a man said with cold amusement behind her, "this seems exactly right." Alina's stomach tightened before she even turned around. Trent Lawson stepped out of the crowd wearing a midnight blue tuxedo tailored so perfectly it looked stitched into his skin. Beside him stood Savannah Pierce, the social media influencer America suddenly adored for her luxury lifestyle videos and polished cruelty disguised as confidence. Savannah's diamond bracelet sparkled as brightly as the smirk on her lips. Trent slid one hand casually into his pocket while looking Alina up and down like someone revisiting a chapter he thought he had already erased. "Relax," he said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Nobody here is looking for a divorced woman with nothing." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd. Someone lowered their champagne glass too slowly. Another guest pretended not to stare. Alina felt every pair of eyes on her, but years of heartbreak had taught her one brutal truth. Public humiliation only wins if you collapse inside it. Savannah tilted her head sympathetically, though the cruelty in her eyes remained sharp as broken glass. "Honestly, Alina," she sighed, "you should have just stayed home tonight. These events can be emotionally difficult for people trying to start over." The words landed exactly how they were intended to. Soft enough to sound civilized. Sharp enough to cut deep. Alina's fingers tightened around the silver clutch in her hand. For one brief second, memories flashed through her mind like broken film reels. Signing divorce papers inside a crowded airport restaurant while strangers watched. Trent laughing quietly with Savannah while she sat frozen beside untouched coffee gone cold. The video clip Savannah uploaded later that night captioned, "Some women confuse loyalty with value." Millions of views. Thousands of comments. And not one apology. Across the ballroom, the orchestra continued playing as though heartbreak were just another decoration beneath luxury lighting. Trent stepped closer now, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimate while remaining cruel. "You really thought people would forget?" he asked. "You really thought you could walk back into rooms like this after everything?" Alina lifted her chin slowly. Her voice remained calm, almost dangerously calm. "I didn't come here for you, Trent." His jaw tightened slightly. Before he could answer, another voice cut cleanly through the ballroom from somewhere behind the crowd. Deep. Controlled. Powerful enough to silence an entire room without trying. "Actually," the voice said, "she's here with me." Conversations stopped instantly. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the musicians near the staircase seemed to lose the rhythm for half a second as guests turned toward the entrance. And then Graham Whitmore appeared beneath the golden lights of the ballroom, tall and composed in a black tuxedo that carried the quiet authority of old money and impossible power. The billionaire CEO crossed the marble floor slowly, his storm-gray eyes fixed only on Alina as flashbulbs suddenly exploded across the room like lightning. Trent's confident expression disappeared first. Then Savannah's smile. Because every person in that ballroom understood the same thing at the exact same moment. The woman they had just tried to humiliate had not arrived alone. She had arrived protected. The silence inside the ballroom stretched so tightly it almost felt visible beneath the chandelier light. Graham Whitmore stopped beside Alina without rushing, without needing to prove anything to anyone in the room. That was the unsettling thing about powerful men like him. They did not demand attention. Attention followed them automatically. His hand rested lightly against the small of Alina's back, steady and warm through the silk of her dress, while camera flashes exploded across the marble walls overlooking the crowded terminal below. Trent Lawson's expression hardened almost instantly, though his eyes betrayed something far uglier than anger. Panic. Graham glanced briefly toward the security guard still standing near the velvet rope. "She is my guest," he said calmly. "That will not be questioned again." The guard immediately stepped aside. Around them, whispers spread through the elite crowd like sparks across dry paper. Graham Whitmore rarely appeared publicly with anyone. Since his wife's passing 4 years earlier, the billionaire CEO had become almost mythological in New York society. Controlled. Distant. Untouchable. Yet here he was standing beside a woman Trent had publicly discarded like yesterday's headlines. Savannah recovered first, her polished smile sliding back into place with socialite precision. "Mr. Whitmore," she said sweetly, extending one manicured hand. "I do not think we have officially met." Graham looked at her hand for exactly 1 second before returning his attention to Alina. "No," he replied smoothly. "I do not believe we have." A few nearby guests exchanged stunned glances. Savannah slowly lowered her hand. Trent forced a laugh, though the sound carried strain beneath it. "Small world," he muttered. "I guess Alina always did know how to reinvent herself." Alina could feel the insult hiding beneath the sentence, wrapped carefully in fake charm for the benefit of the crowd. Years ago, comments like that would have shattered her confidence for days. Tonight they only exhausted her. Graham finally turned his gaze toward Trent fully, his gray eyes unreadable beneath the ballroom lights. "Reinvention usually requires courage," he said evenly. "Not everyone is capable of it." The words landed softly. That made them worse. Trent's jaw tightened hard enough for the muscle to flick beneath his skin. Somewhere behind them, a violinist resumed playing while servers floated through the ballroom carrying trays of champagne beneath ceilings painted gold and ivory nearly a century earlier. Outside the giant windows overlooking Grand Central, Manhattan glowed beneath falling snow. Beautiful things always looked softer from a distance. Alina exhaled slowly, still trying to understand how this night had transformed so quickly. 3 months ago she had been shelving used novels in a tiny Brooklyn bookstore while wondering whether anyone in the city still remembered the woman Trent Lawson humiliated online. Then Graham Whitmore walked into her life carrying his frightened 6-year-old daughter through JFK Airport after a security scare grounded flights for hours. One conversation beneath fluorescent terminal lights had changed everything afterward. Not dramatically. Quietly. Morning coffee deliveries she never asked for. A handwritten note after her bookstore hosted a reading for children. Graham showing up one rainy evening just to repair a broken shelf himself because she had casually mentioned needing help. He never overwhelmed her. Never pushed. Never treated her like someone damaged beyond repair. That was what unsettled her most. Trent suddenly smiled again, though bitterness sharpened the edges. "Well," he said loudly enough for surrounding guests to hear, "I suppose everybody deserves a second chance." Graham picked up a champagne glass from a passing tray but never drank from it. "Some people," he replied calmly, "should have appreciated the first one." The room went completely still again. Even Savannah stopped smiling. And for the first time since entering the ballroom, Alina saw something crack inside Trent Lawson's expression. Because deep down, he finally understood the one thing he never expected. The woman he thought he erased had returned more powerful than his memory of her. The orchestra shifted into a softer melody as conversations cautiously returned around the ballroom, but the energy had changed completely. People were no longer watching Trent Lawson and Savannah Pierce like the center of the evening. Every eye followed Graham Whitmore and Alina Brooks instead. The couple moved slowly through the crowd beneath glowing chandeliers while photographers lingered near the marble staircase hoping for another headline-making moment. Alina could feel the stares pressing against her skin from every direction. Some curious. Some admiring. Some jealous. New York society loved nothing more than watching a fallen woman rise beautifully in public. Graham remained calm beside her, one hand resting lightly against the center of her back as though shielding her from the room without making a performance of it. That quiet protection unsettled her more than grand gestures ever could. Across the ballroom, Savannah leaned toward Trent with tension sharpening her expression beneath layers of flawless makeup. "Why is he doing this?" she whispered harshly. "Since when does Graham Whitmore even attend events with women?" Trent kept his eyes fixed on Alina while loosening the knot of his bow tie slightly. "I do not know," he muttered. "But she is enjoying this too much." The bitterness in his voice surprised even himself. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Alina did not look broken anymore. She looked untouchable. A server passed carrying crystal champagne flutes balanced perfectly on silver trays while guests whispered behind diamond-covered hands nearby. "That is Trent Lawson's ex-wife. The one from the airport divorce video? She is with Graham Whitmore now? How did that happen?" The humiliation Trent once forced onto her publicly had transformed into fascination. In Manhattan, public opinion changed quickly when power entered the room. Graham guided Alina toward the upper balcony overlooking the terminal below where thousands of travelers moved beneath the glowing constellations painted across the ceiling. Snow drifted softly beyond the giant windows while train announcements echoed faintly from downstairs. For the first time all evening, the noise around them faded. "Are you all right?" Graham asked quietly. Alina stared out toward the city lights blinking through the snowfall. "I forgot how exhausting wealthy people can be," she answered with a faint smile. The corner of Graham's mouth lifted slightly. "You handled yourself better than most executives I know." She looked down at the champagne glass in her hands, watching the bubbles rise slowly to the surface. "There was a time when comments like his would have destroyed me for weeks." Graham remained silent for a moment before speaking carefully. "Then he never deserved the version of you he had." The words settled somewhere deep inside her chest with dangerous warmth. Months ago, after the divorce became internet entertainment, Alina had convinced herself she would never trust admiration again. Attention had become something sharp, temporary, cruel. Yet Graham never treated her like a scandal to rescue or a woman to repair. He listened when she spoke. He noticed details no one else did. The first edition novels she loved. Her habit of humming quietly while organizing bookshelves. The way she tucked loose curls behind her ear whenever she felt nervous. Small things. Human things. Down below in the ballroom, Trent watched them from across the crowd with growing frustration darkening his features. Savannah folded her arms tightly. "You are staring," she snapped under her breath. Trent ignored her completely. Because standing beside Graham Whitmore beneath the city lights, Alina looked exactly like the woman he once fell in love with before ambition poisoned everything between them. The same graceful posture. The same quiet eyes. The same dignity he used to admire before he started seeing kindness as weakness. Then Graham did something simple that shattered the last illusion Trent still clung to. He reached over gently and adjusted the silver clasp on Alina's coat where it had loosened near her shoulder. The gesture lasted barely 2 seconds. Soft. Natural. Intimate in the quietest possible way. But Trent felt something cold settle in his stomach immediately afterward. Because for the first time since the divorce, he realized another man was not simply interested in Alina Brooks. Another man was already cherishing her. Snow continued falling outside Grand Central Terminal in slow silver streaks while the charity auction reached its peak beneath the glowing ballroom lights. Wealthy donors gathered near the stage where rare artwork and luxury vacation packages were being sold for breathtaking amounts of money, but the real spectacle of the evening had quietly become Alina Brooks standing beside Graham Whitmore. Every movement between them drew attention now. Every glance. Every soft exchange beneath crystal chandeliers and orchestra music. Manhattan society could smell emotional history from miles away, and tonight the room was drowning in it. Trent Lawson stood near the champagne tower with tension carved sharply across his face while Savannah scrolled furiously through social media on her phone. "It is already everywhere," she hissed quietly. "People are posting videos of him defending her." Trent grabbed the phone from her hand. His stomach twisted immediately. One clip already had hundreds of thousands of views. Graham stepping beside Alina. Graham ignoring Savannah's handshake. Graham saying, "Some people should have appreciated the first one." The comments underneath were even worse. "She upgraded. He lost her. The way that billionaire looks at her." Trent's jaw tightened so hard it hurt. Across the ballroom, Alina laughed softly at something Graham's daughter had just whispered to her over video call. The 6-year-old girl's smiling face glowed from the phone screen while Alina crouched slightly near the balcony railing, listening with full attention the way she always did with children. Graham watched her quietly from a few feet away, one hand resting in his pocket while something warm softened his usually guarded expression. Trent noticed it instantly. That look. It was not fascination anymore. It was attachment. Savannah folded her arms tightly beside him. "You are acting ridiculous," she muttered. "You divorced her." But the words no longer sounded reassuring even to her. Because everyone in the room could now see the contrast clearly. Savannah sparkled beautifully beneath the ballroom lights, polished and expensive and loud enough to command attention. Alina did not compete for attention at all. Somehow that made her impossible to ignore. The auction host's voice echoed across the ballroom announcing the next donor presentation while guests returned to their tables. Graham gently reached for Alina's empty champagne flute. "You have not eaten anything tonight," he said quietly. "That is because your city apparently survives on champagne and public humiliation," she replied dryly. A genuine laugh escaped him then, low and unexpected. Several nearby guests immediately glanced over in surprise. Graham Whitmore almost never laughed publicly. Alina noticed the reaction and shook her head faintly. "You know people are staring at us like we started a small war in Manhattan tonight." Graham leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "Let them stare." The simplicity of the sentence unsettled her heartbeat more than it should have. Before she could answer, a woman in an elegant emerald gown approached nervously holding a phone in trembling hands. "Ms. Brooks," she said carefully, "I just wanted to say something." Alina turned politely. The woman smiled softly. "3 months ago I saw that airport video online," she admitted. "I remember feeling terrible for you. But tonight," her eyes glistened slightly as she glanced toward Graham nearby. "Tonight you look like someone who survived." For one brief moment, Alina could not speak. Because survival was exactly what the last year had been. Not glamorous. Not inspiring. Quiet survival. Learning how to walk through grocery stores after strangers recognized her from a humiliating video online. Learning how to sit alone in tiny apartments after once sharing luxury penthouses. Learning how to rebuild dignity one ordinary morning at a time. The woman squeezed her hand gently before walking away. Alina stared down at the marble floor beneath her heels, suddenly emotional in a way she had not prepared for. Graham stepped beside her again. "What is it?" he asked softly. She looked up slowly, eyes reflecting the chandelier light above them. "I think tonight is the first night in a very long time," she whispered carefully, "that I do not feel ashamed of what happened to me." Graham held her gaze steadily. "You were never the shameful part of the story." And across the ballroom, Trent Lawson finally realized something terrifying. The world was no longer seeing Alina as the woman he left behind. They were seeing her as the woman he never deserved. The auction reached its final hour beneath glittering chandeliers and soft golden light, but the atmosphere inside the ballroom had shifted completely away from charity and towards something far more dangerous. Regret. Trent Lawson could feel it tightening around him with every passing minute as guests continued whispering about Alina Brooks and Graham Whitmore near the balcony overlooking Manhattan. Across the room, billionaires discussed stock markets and political donations while secretly watching a different story unfold entirely. The story of a woman everyone once pitied becoming the most admired person in the building. Trent loosened his cufflinks irritably and grabbed another glass of champagne from a passing server, though he barely tasted it. Savannah stood beside him scrolling through endless comments flooding social media. "This is becoming a disaster," she muttered under her breath. "People are turning her into some kind of symbol." Trent looked up immediately toward Alina again. Symbol. The word unsettled him because it was true. She was no longer simply his ex-wife in the eyes of the public. She had become something larger. Grace under humiliation. Quiet survival. Dignity returning in designer heels beneath crystal lights. And beside her stood one of the most powerful men in New York looking at her like she was the only calm thing left in his world. Graham and Alina now sat at a private table near the orchestra platform while donors applauded the final auction results. Candlelight reflected against the dark silk of Alina's dress while Graham listened carefully as she spoke about the literacy program her bookstore hosted every Saturday for underprivileged children in Brooklyn. He never interrupted her. Never redirected the conversation back toward himself the way wealthy men often did. He simply listened. That alone made him different from anyone she had ever known. "You care about people in a way most executives pretend to during interviews," Alina said softly. Graham smiled faintly at the observation. "My daughter says the same thing when she wants something expensive." A quiet laugh escaped Alina before she could stop it. The sound carried warmth through him instantly. Nearby guests noticed again. Graham Whitmore looked lighter around her. Human. Less haunted. Across the ballroom, Trent stared at the scene with growing disbelief because he suddenly remembered another version of himself years ago. The younger man who used to sit beside Alina inside tiny diners at 2 in the morning while she talked excitedly about books and art and dreams bigger than both of them. Back then he loved how deeply she cared about ordinary people. Later, after success arrived, he started calling those same qualities naive. Savannah leaned closer beside him, irritation sharpening her voice. "You are embarrassing yourself." Trent barely heard her. Because another realization had started sinking into his chest with unbearable clarity. Graham was not attracted to Alina despite her past. He admired her because of who she had become through it. That truth hit harder than any insult could have. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the auction host stepped onto the stage announcing the evening's final donor. Recognition ceremony. Tonight, the host declared proudly, "We honor individuals whose resilience and generosity continue shaping New York City for the better." Applause echoed across the room. Then the host smiled warmly toward the front tables. "One person in particular deserves recognition tonight. Ms. Alina Brooks, whose literacy initiative has already helped over 300 children this year." Alina froze in visible surprise as cameras instantly turned toward her again. "Please join us on stage." The applause grew louder now. Real applause. Not polite society clapping. Genuine admiration rolled across the ballroom while Graham rose calmly beside her. Alina looked overwhelmed for the first time all evening. "I did not know about this," she whispered. Graham adjusted the sleeve of his tuxedo casually. "I may have made one phone call." Emotion flickered across her face too quickly for most people to catch, but Trent saw it clearly from across the room. Gratitude. Trust. The beginning of something dangerously close to love. Alina slowly walked toward the stage beneath hundreds of watching eyes while photographers rushed forward near the velvet ropes. Her black dress shimmered beneath the spotlight as applause thundered through the ballroom once more. And standing alone near the champagne tower, Trent Lawson finally understood the cruelest part of losing someone good. Sometimes they do not simply move on after you break them. Sometimes they rise so beautifully that the entire world begins celebrating what you failed to value. The applause inside the ballroom seemed endless as Alina Brooks stepped onto the stage beneath the soft glow of crystal chandeliers and television cameras. Her hands trembled slightly around the glass award now resting against the dark fabric of her dress, but her expression remained composed in the way women learn after surviving public heartbreak. Below the stage, Manhattan's elite watched her with something entirely different from pity now. Respect. The giant windows behind the orchestra revealed snowfall drifting over the city while flashes from photographers painted bursts of white light across the room every few seconds. Ms. Brooks, the host said warmly into the microphone, your literacy initiative has changed hundreds of lives in Brooklyn this year. Tonight we celebrate not only generosity, but resilience. The word lingered in the ballroom like perfume. Resilience. Alina looked out across the crowd slowly, her eyes moving past strangers in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos until they landed briefly on Trent Lawson standing near the back beside Savannah. For one painful second, memories collided inside her chest. The airport restaurant. The divorce papers. Savannah's camera recording her humiliation while strangers pretended not to stare. The months afterward spent rebuilding herself quietly while the internet turned her heartbreak into entertainment. But standing here tonight beneath warm golden lights, she no longer felt like the abandoned woman from that video. She felt present. Whole. Seen. Thank you, she said softly into the microphone. The ballroom immediately quieted. A year ago, I would never have imagined standing in a room like this again. Her voice remained calm, though emotion flickered carefully beneath each word. Not because I lost confidence in myself, but because public humiliation has a way of making you believe the world will only remember your worst moment. Silence spread deeper now. Even the servers carrying champagne slowed near the marble columns. What saved me, Alina continued gently, was realizing that survival is not loud. Sometimes survival looks like showing up to work when your heart is broken. Sometimes it looks like rebuilding your dignity quietly while people continue talking about your pain like it belongs to them. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others nodded slowly. Across the room, Savannah shifted uncomfortably beside Trent while social media clips of the speech already began spreading online in real time. And sometimes, Alina said carefully, glancing briefly toward Graham Whitmore near the front table, healing begins the moment someone finally sees your value without asking you to prove it first. The ballroom erupted into applause again, louder this time. Genuine. Emotional. Graham held her gaze steadily from below the stage, pride softening his usually guarded features while camera flashes exploded around him non-stop. Trent felt something sharp twist deep inside his chest because he suddenly understood a truth he had spent months avoiding. Alina had not become extraordinary after the divorce. She had always been extraordinary. He had simply stopped seeing it once ambition made him believe kindness was weakness. As Alina stepped down from the stage, a young reporter rushed toward Graham near the orchestra platform. Mr. Whitmore, she asked breathlessly, are the rumors true? Are you and Ms. Brooks officially together? The entire area near them went still again. Phones immediately lifted. Guests leaned closer pretending not to listen. Graham glanced toward Alina standing only a few feet away beneath the chandelier light. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Graham answered calmly enough to silence the room. The only rumor I care about, he said, is whether she realizes how remarkable she is. Audible gasps spread across the ballroom. Savannah's face paled instantly while Trent stared at Graham in disbelief. But the billionaire was not finished. Graham crossed the marble floor slowly until he stood directly in front of Alina once more. His voice lowered slightly, intimate enough to feel personal even in a crowded room. You spent too much time around people who measured your worth by what they could gain from you, he said softly. I hope someday you understand your presence alone changes every room you walk into. Alina's breath caught quietly. Not because of the crowd watching them. Not because of the cameras. But because after everything she survived, someone was finally loving her in a way that felt safe instead of conditional. And standing beneath the glittering lights of Grand Central Terminal while applause echoed once more around them, Trent Lawson realized he had not merely lost his marriage. He had lost the only woman who ever truly believed in him before success changed who he became. The ballroom buzzed with restless energy after Graham Whitmore's words spread across social media in real time. Guests refreshed their phones beneath chandelier light, while clips of the billionaire defending Alina Brooks flooded every platform in America. Headlines were already forming before the auction even ended. Billionaire CEO praises divorced woman in viral gala moment. The woman New York tried to humiliate just won the room. Screens glowed across marble tables while reporters whispered urgently into headsets near the stage. But through all the noise, Alina stood motionless beside the orchestra platform trying to steady the emotions rising inside her chest. She had spent an entire year teaching herself not to expect tenderness from anyone. Especially not in public. Graham remained beside her calmly as though the attention surrounding them meant nothing at all. That was the strange thing about him. The more chaotic the room became, the quieter he seemed. A photographer approached carefully. "Mr. Whitmore, Ms. Brooks, may we get one photo together?" Before Alina could answer, Graham looked toward her first. "Not the cameras. Her. Only if you're comfortable," he said softly. Such a simple sentence. Yet it nearly broke something inside her because Trent had never asked what made her comfortable once success entered his life. During their marriage, public image always came first. Appearances. Investors. Reputation. Alina nodded slowly. Flashbulbs exploded immediately as Graham stepped beside her beneath the glittering lights. His hand rested lightly against her waist again, protective without possession, while photographers called their names from every direction. "Look this way. One more. Perfect." Across the ballroom, Trent watched the scene with hollow disbelief spreading across his face. Months ago, Alina could barely walk through Manhattan without strangers recognizing her from the airport divorce clip. Now those same cameras followed her with admiration instead of pity. Savannah exhaled sharply beside him. "I cannot do this anymore tonight." Trent barely heard her. His attention stayed locked on Alina laughing softly after one photographer accidentally stepped backward into a waiter carrying champagne. The sound of her laughter reached him even across the crowded ballroom. Warm. Natural. Familiar. He had not heard that version of her in years. Success had stolen it from their marriage long before the divorce papers ever appeared. Savannah suddenly turned toward him, frustration flashing across her polished expression. "You are still in love with her." The accusation landed heavily between them. Trent finally looked at her, exhausted now instead of defensive. Because denying it suddenly felt pointless. Not love in the way she meant. Something worse. Regret. Deep enough to poison every expensive thing he built afterward. Before he could answer, another round of applause erupted through the ballroom as the Whitmore Foundation announced a surprise donation matching every contribution made that evening. Graham stepped onto the stage briefly while reporters crowded near the stairs. "Tonight is not only about charity," he said into the microphone calmly. "It is about recognizing people who continue choosing kindness after life gives them every reason not to." His eyes shifted toward Alina standing below the stage. "That kind of strength deserves more respect than wealth ever will." The room exploded into applause again. Several guests even stood to their feet. Savannah stared toward the stage in disbelief. He is talking about her in front of half of Manhattan. But Trent already understood something she did not. Graham Whitmore was not performing. Every word coming from him was painfully sincere. Alina lowered her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by emotions she no longer knew how to hide. She had spent months rebuilding her dignity privately, never imagining someone powerful enough to command entire rooms would one day speak about her with such open admiration. Graham stepped down from the stage moments later and walked directly back to her through the applauding crowd. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Alina nodded carefully though her voice almost failed her. "Nobody has ever defended me like this before." Graham studied her face for one silent moment before answering. Then the people before me failed you. The simplicity of the sentence shattered the final walls around her heart far more dangerously than grand declarations ever could. And watching from across the ballroom while applause continued echoing beneath the chandeliers, Trent Lawson finally realized the cruelest truth of all. Another man had not only fallen in love with Alina Brooks. Another man was teaching her what love was supposed to feel like. The charity auction slowly began winding down after midnight, but nobody inside Grand Central Terminal seemed ready to leave. Snow covered the streets outside in soft white layers while Manhattan glittered beyond the towering windows like a city suspended between dream and memory. Reporters still crowded near the marble staircase hoping for one final statement from Graham Whitmore and Alina Brooks, while guests lingered beside champagne towers pretending they were discussing business instead of replaying every emotional moment from the evening. Alina stood near the balcony alone for the first time all night, her fingertips resting lightly against the cold railing as she looked down toward the terminal below where travelers hurried beneath glowing clocks and holiday lights. The city kept moving no matter how much a person's life changed. That truth had once devastated her. Tonight it comforted her strangely. Behind her, the ballroom hummed softly with orchestra music and low conversations, but Alina barely heard any of it anymore. Her thoughts kept circling back to Graham. The way he asked permission before every photograph. The way he listened instead of performing. The way he defended her without turning her pain into spectacle. She had forgotten men like that existed. Still running away when things get emotional? Trent Lawson's voice appeared quietly behind her. Alina closed her eyes briefly before turning around. He stood a few feet away beneath the chandelier glow, his tuxedo slightly loosened now, exhaustion darkening his features in a way she had never seen during their marriage. For the first time in years, he looked less like a polished executive and more like a man forced to sit alone with his own mistakes. "I am not running," she replied calmly. "I just wanted air." Trent nodded faintly while sliding his hands into his pockets. For several long seconds neither of them spoke. Snow continued falling beyond the windows, while train announcements echoed softly below them through the terminal. Finally Trent exhaled slowly. "I was cruel to you." The word sounded unfamiliar coming from him. Honest. Unprotected. Alina studied him carefully without answering. He laughed bitterly under his breath. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked quietly. "I convinced myself leaving you was proof I had evolved. Like success meant I deserved someone shinier. Louder. Easier to display." His eyes lowered briefly toward the marble floor. "And tonight I realized I spent an entire year trying to replace the one person who actually made my life feel real." Alina felt sadness more than anger now. Sadness for the younger version of them that once believed love would survive ambition. "Trent," she said softly, "you did not lose me tonight." He looked up immediately. "You lost me the moment you decided humiliating me was easier than respecting me." The sentence landed with quiet finality between them. No screaming. No revenge. Just truth. Trent swallowed hard as regret flickered openly across his face. "I thought nobody else would ever," his voice failed briefly before continuing lower. "I thought nobody else would ever see you the way I used to." Alina's expression softened slightly then, not with romance but understanding. "That was your mistake," she whispered. "You stopped seeing me long before anyone else started." Silence settled heavily around them once more. Across the ballroom, Savannah had already disappeared without saying goodbye. Even she understood the evening had ended differently than expected. Then footsteps approached quietly behind Alina. Graham. He stopped beside her calmly, his presence steady and grounding against the emotional weight hanging in the air. Trent immediately straightened slightly, though the confidence he once carried so easily was completely gone now. Graham looked between them briefly before focusing on Alina. "Everything all right?" he asked gently. Alina nodded once. "Yes." Trent stared at Graham for a long moment, pride battling humiliation inside his expression. Then finally he gave a short bitter laugh. "Take care of her," he said quietly. Graham's answer came. Without hesitation. I already do. The simplicity of the response hit harder than cruelty ever could. Trent lowered his eyes briefly before walking away alone through the glowing ballroom while orchestra music followed him toward the exit. Alina watched him disappear into the crowd without chasing him this time. Some endings did not require revenge. Only distance. Graham stepped closer beside her as snowfall reflected softly against the windows surrounding them. "You okay?" he asked again. Alina looked up at him slowly, her eyes shining beneath the chandelier light. For the first time in a very long time, she whispered carefully, "I think I finally am." And somewhere deep inside her chest, the woman who once cried silently over divorce papers in an airport restaurant finally began believing she deserved happiness again. 6 months later, Manhattan shimmered beneath the glow of early spring rain as black cars lined the entrance of the New York Museum of Modern Art for one of the city's most exclusive charity galas. Camera flashes illuminated the marble steps while reporters crowded behind velvet ropes calling the names of politicians, celebrities, and billionaires arriving beneath crystal chandeliers visible through the towering glass entrance. But tonight the crowd was waiting for someone else. Inside the museum's grand atrium, soft piano music drifted beneath enormous modern sculptures while New York's elite whispered excitedly near champagne towers and floral arrangements worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Giant screens displayed the evening's featured literacy initiative, now officially partnered with the Whitmore Foundation after becoming one of the fastest-growing educational programs in the state. And at the center of every screen was the same woman once humiliated in an airport restaurant while strangers watched her marriage collapse in public. Alina Brooks stood near the museum's staircase adjusting the silver sleeve of her gown while trying unsuccessfully to calm her heartbeat. Her dress shimmered like midnight beneath the gallery lights, elegant without excess, while diamond earrings reflected soft flashes from photographers gathering. Below. Somewhere across the room, guests were already whispering her name with admiration instead of pity. The transformation still felt unreal sometimes. "You look nervous," Graham Whitmore said quietly as he approached beside her. Alina turned toward him, instantly calmer at the sight of his familiar gray eyes. Even after months together, his presence still carried the same steady warmth that first found her beneath harsh airport lights on the worst year of her life. Graham adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo before offering her his hand naturally, like the gesture belonged to both of them now. "There are 500 people out there," Alina murmured softly. "Most of them already love you," he replied. "The other half are hoping you notice them." A quiet laugh escaped her. Nearby, Graham's 6-year-old daughter hurried toward them in a tiny cream-colored dress, excitement glowing across her face. "Daddy," she whispered loudly, "everybody keeps asking if Alina is really the lady from the videos." Graham crouched slightly beside her. "And what did you tell them?" The little girl smiled proudly before wrapping both arms around Alina's hand. "I told them she is the nicest person in New York." Something inside Alina melted instantly. Not because of the compliment. Because after everything she survived, she finally belonged somewhere gentle. A museum coordinator approached nervously moments later. "Mr. Whitmore, Ms. Brooks, they are ready for your entrance." Beyond the closed ballroom doors, reporters and donors waited beneath golden lights while cameras prepared to broadcast the evening live across multiple networks. Graham looked toward Alina carefully. "Ready?" 6 months ago, she would have said no. 6 months ago, public rooms still felt dangerous. Every crowd carried the memory of humiliation. Every camera felt cruel. But tonight was different. Tonight she was not arriving as someone abandoned. She was arriving as someone rebuilt. Alina slipped her hand into Graham's and lifted her chin slowly. "Yes," she answered calmly. The ballroom doors opened instantly. Light flooded across the marble floor while applause erupted the moment they stepped inside together. Hundreds of guests rose to their feet beneath glittering chandeliers as cameras flashed non-stop around them. Some people smiled. Others stared in admiration. Several women wiped tears quietly after recognizing the woman they once watched suffer online. And standing near the back of the ballroom beside a marble column, Trent Lawson watched silently as Alina entered the room beside Graham Whitmore and his daughter like she had always belonged there. No bitterness remained in his face tonight. Only acceptance. Because the woman he once reduced to a painful chapter in his life had become someone impossible for the world to ignore. Alina noticed him briefly across the ballroom. Their eyes met for one quiet second beneath the chandelier light. Then she smiled softly, not with revenge, not with triumph, but with peace. Before turning forward again toward the life waiting for her now. Graham squeezed her hand gently as applause continued echoing through the museum. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Alina looked around the glowing ballroom, at the people celebrating her work, at the little girl holding onto her arm, at the man beside her who never once treated her love like something conditional. Then she smiled fully for the first time in years. "I think everything finally changed the moment I stopped believing my pain was the end of my story." And beneath the golden lights of Manhattan while spring rain shimmered against the museum windows, the woman once discarded by heartbreak walked forward not as someone rescued by love, but as someone finally seen by it.